Hi and welcome to Spooky Hours. My name's David Saunderson and we're joined again by esoteric writer and researcher Andy Mercer, who's going to talk to us today about runes. How are you, Andy?
Yeah, I'm pretty good. Having quite a good day so far. So yeah.
Well, that's great. It's a nice sunny day. It looks like it's sunny where you are. It's certainly sunny where I am. Now, tell us, as far as I know, runes are basically dominoes or something, some little stones you put in a bag and you shake around and people tell the future with them. I imagine that's a pretty simplistic explanation of runes.
A little bit, yes. I mean, runes themselves originate from Europe and go back literally thousands of years. Various examples of runic inscriptions can be found that date 3,000 to 4,000 BC, just very basic ideas of them. But they really come to a prominence, if you like, in the sort of medieval times. They are a system of communication which could be written onto stone, wood, rock, etc. But they also have more mystical value as well. I mean, one of the earliest examples we know of runes being talked about is actually found in the writings of Caesar, when he was basically invading Europe from ancient Rome, and talked about the northern people basically using pieces of wood with markings carved onto them to predict the outcome of battles and things like that. Now, they probably are runes, at least a variation of runes, but there are all sorts of different versions of runes can be found across Europe, from as far as south as places like Greece, or even as far as the Ukraine, right up to places like Scotland and Ireland. There are examples of discovering, of course, probably best known for Scandinavia.
Are runes the actual? Are they actually the words or the actual little bits of wood, or is it the
Effectively,
actual alphabet?
yeah, the letters, exactly. Runic futharks, what we talk about, which is the order of a number of runic characters together. Now, we use the word alphabet to describe the 26 letters of our alphabet, but it comes from alpha and beta, the first two characters. The word futhark is the first 6 or 7 runes, F-U-R, etc. And that's the name they're given, futharks. Now, there are various different examples of futharks around Europe that can be found. In modern times, we tend to talk about being 3, which is the Elder or Germanic futhark, the Younger or Scandinavian futhark, which comes from Scandinavia, of course, and the Anglo-Saxon or Anglo-Frasian futhark, which you tend to find here. Now, the Germanic one has 24 runes in it. The Scandinavian one, which comes later, has 16, so they've basically dropped a few out. But the Anglo-Saxon one comes in a little bit later still, and there is anything from 25, 26 up to 33, depending on which version you look at. The interesting thing is this idea of them being only a certain number for each kind is a modern thing. There are lots of different versions with different numbers of runes in them, but they all have certain characteristics that are similar. They tend to be made of straight lines, or only 3 or 4 lines, so they're easy to carve onto wood or rock. They're not circular like our letters are. They tend to be much more straightforward than that. And they're often used more for decoration of things like swords and shields, etc., for battle and war, to connect with the idea of sort of Viking gods or Germanic gods, that you're trying to sort of invoke them or invoke essentially supernatural power to help you in your battle. So they're not seen so much as an ordinary way of writing as a substitute for, say, English or German or whatever. They are used much more magically, and the idea that you can predict the future comes from that notion as well. Now, runic divination, as it's called, is a bit like tarot cards. You pick a certain number of runes, little stones or wood or whatever, and each one has an individual meaning, but also you can combine them together to create more than one meaning, to give you a narrative of what may be about to happen, or help understand experiences. Also, people use runes for things like meditation, where you just think about the particular symbol and what it means, what it connects to, because not only do they have individual meanings as letters, as in A, B, C, etc., each one has its own name and an association with something, be it an animal or a state of mind or homeland or buildings or the sun, things like that. So they have a broad connotation as well as individual letters and characters.
So, did people use runes in the olden days? Is it just for magic, or I mean, imagine like if I was putting "this is David's bag" or something like that. Is that, when you're saying on swords, do
Yeah,
people use it for writing letters to people, or is it just basically magical?
they can be used for writing letters and communication. Of course, things like stone and rock were all that would survive, and some wooden examples that survive. But anything written, anything soft, that tends to degrade and get lost anyway. So the examples that we have left tend to be on monuments and standing stones, etc. But again, primarily used for magical reasons, but also for general communication as well. But also things like putting your name on something gave it magical power, connected it to you personally. So putting "my name is David" on your bag connects it more to you, so it gives it some of your own energy, if you like, goes into it. That was the idea, at least. So they tend to be used more that way. Also, there are books and manuscripts that have been written in runes again, partly to empower them magically, but also for communication, but also to record important events. It's almost like in modern time we use Latin for things like sort of medical stuff and sort of the classification of animals. We might give it an actual normal everyday name, but also have another name. A random example, that we talk about guinea pigs, little furry things, but they're called cavies. The Latin name is cavy, so it's like a Latin term, runic term if you like, and an ordinary meaning for something. So they kind of worked a little bit like that, more of a higher meaning, but they still can be used and well used for communication. Sometimes just for secret communication, because they're not as well known as, say, as a more modern language. They might be used that way, sort of historically as well as now, if you like. So they always had a bit of a dual purpose. They were more magical than mundane, but they will be used for both purposes, certainly.
Okay, and what kind of things do you, like a person nowadays, what would they use runes for? Like yourself, you've studied them, you've written about them. What can I get out of runes today?
Again, that kind of more magical purpose, the idea of meditation on runes. As I mean, when I talked last time about meditation and invocation, where you're trying to connect with a sort of other energies, if you like, you can use runes in that way, as an individual rune, or you can combine several together to create what are known as bind runes, which are combining both the image of the rune, 3 or 4 drawn together into a single pattern, but also you're combining the idea of things. Like, for example, you might combine the rune for the sun and the rune for Tyr, which is like a war. You can bring them together to bring energy together, to strengthen, to create things like that. And again, the ordinary first thing people think of things like divination, that's all predicting the future, but also people know runes for things like Lord of the Rings, where they kind of had a magical meaning, as well as being the language of the dwarves. They actually had magical powers. Again, things will be inscribed on weaponry and shields, as I say, to empower them, make them stronger. So they tend to be used more for those sort of purposes in modern times.
Just thinking, M.R. James is casting the runes, written on a little piece of paper, sort of a spell. Is that the kind of things people would use them for? Maybe write a little spell and hand it to someone, and like in
can be part of it. I mean, it's a bit of a misnomer, because the M.R. James's book, the runes itself as a word means whispered secret. So it can be other characters are used and still get called runes, but they're not proper runes as such. So, but I remember writing in the film, that version of it, they do appear to be written as if they are runes themselves, but M.R. James's book is not as precise as that. It's a bit more vague as to what he's referring to. But that idea of runes as being, as I say, literally meaning secret or hidden things. So it works in a more broader sense of what the word actually means, certainly.
If someone wanted to learn more about runes and how to use them, how would you suggest they go about doing that?
Well, one thing they could look out for, of course, is my book, which I've just completed the 2nd edition of, which will come out with Troy books in a little while. But there are dozens of books out, hundreds of books out there on runes. The one I always tell people to avoid is a guy called Ralph Bloom. Now, he wrote a book in the 1950s, originally in German and published in English as well. But he kind of kick-started or restarted interest in the runes in the 50s, but unfortunately some of the ideas in his book are a bit naff, they're a bit silly. The idea of what he calls the blank rune, which is the rune of the weird, the rune of fate. Now, there's no such thing. There's never been a blank rune. He's using the 24 and adding this extra one in that just doesn't belong. So that's probably the one to avoid, but there are dozens and dozens.
Sounds like he's putting a space, like a Scrabble board space or something like that.
Well, in actual fact, there is some truth to that, because you could buy with the book a set of plastic runes, and it turned out it was a lot cheaper to produce 25, a set of 5x5, than 24. So rather than throw the spare one away, or even have it as a spare, you came up with this notion, let's have a blank rune. There's no such thing as a blank rune. But I mean, it depends on how you want to approach. There are lots of more what we might call magical texts around. There's also good academic texts as well that you can read that tell you a bit more of the history of the runes and how they've been used in times gone by. But yeah, I mean, I obviously recommend my own book. My own book is a little bit different, because mine are based on a 4th set of runes, which are called the Armanen runes. Now, they don't have the same history to them. In fact, they were probably invented. It's a grey area, because some people say they are old and genuinely real, but I think they were invented in around about 1900 by a guy called Guido von List, who was trying to introduce a kind of Germanic mysticism into sort of Central Europe and Germany at the time. Now, unfortunately, later on, they get misused by a certain group of people who took over Germany in the 1930s. I won't even name them, you know what I'm talking about. But they were never used by the Nazis. They were actually a different set. They used the Elder runes for their symbols. When you see Nazi uniform with runes on, it's the Elder that they use, not the Armanen. But there's a lot of misunderstanding that the Armanen runes were used by the Nazis when they weren't. And my book is an attempt to readdress that. But the reason why I chose the Armanen runes is because they're fairly modern. They are also what you might describe as the most esoteric, as in they were specifically designed for esoteric, magical, occult purposes, rather than just being something from history that had been copied. So we know full well exactly what each one's supposed to mean, because effectively Von List created them from a medieval poem called the Havamal. Now the Havamal itself lists 18 what they're called spells in the text. It's an old poem, but he believed that those 18 poems, 18 lines rather, were actually referring to 18 runes, and then created the Armanen runes based around those. Now they're pretty much the same as the younger Futhot, the Scandinavian one I was talking about, but there's 16 of those. He added 2 more to create the 18. So that's the ones my book is about, as an attempt to kind of reintroduce them as being runes that you can use. They're not just linked to the far right, which unfortunately some people still link them to, but they're not. So
I suppose that's with anything that involves a sort of Germanic, old, kind of thing, that they bring that into sort of a white Aryan power type, whatever they're.
Absolutely. They do have a problem, unfortunately. One of those areas of the esoteric that, when you talk about runes, sooner or later their element tends to come up. As I say, they've been kind of helped a bit with the fact that Lord of the Rings has become very, very popular, and runes appear in that, which has kind of helped clean up a little bit. But people do still have that association with the far right, unfortunately, using runes. And I say often they make that mistake of thinking of the Armanen runes because they were born of Germany in the turn of the last century, it's in 1900, that's what they ended up being used for. But they weren't. They used the Elder, much older Germanic or Elder Futhot, which are the ones you tend to get in the books about. Okay. Most of the time when you come across runes, they're talking about the 24 runes of the Elder, by far the best known both here in mainland Europe and in America. But there are these others that I speak of.
Now, I imagine there must be quite a lot of nice sets around of runes, because they are very decorative. Do you have any particular favourites, or what particular types that you use? Because I can just see in my head little rocks. So I know.
You can do. I think that's the thing. One thing that attracts people to using runes is you can make them yourself. They're very straightforward to make. You can use things like pieces of wood. People use carved them out of wood, get a trunk of wood and cut it into little sections and carve them onto the top of the section. You can get precious stones, you can get crystals. You can actually paint them on yourself, or if you're more skilled, perhaps carve them in, or not just paint them on. You can make them yourself. That has a much stronger connection to you personally, because they're your runes you've made. Of course, you can buy them. People buy crystal ones all the time, but I think it's much nicer to make them yourself, because you have that connection. It's one thing they win over against something like the tarot cards, because you can make tarot cards yourself. It's a hell of a lot of work to draw 78 cards yourself. But with runes, if you're making like 18, 16 or 24 runes yourself, remember to say they're just simple, straightforward lines most of the time. So it's quite easy to just do it yourself. So one theory is that it should be something that's been living, so wood is a good example. Another theory is that it should be something that's going to last, so make them from stone. Depends where you look, really, where you read. You can simply paint them on, or use a black marker pen if you've got light coloured wood, or you can burn them on if you use like a soldering iron. You can connect with them because you make them yourself. You construct them, and therefore they're your runes. They matter to you personally.
So it's more about the marking, though, isn't it? I'm assuming it's the marking that you're shuffling around, or whatever you might be doing.
Yes, yeah, you are. The process of construction yourself is you are literally making them. They are therefore yours and yours alone.
Yeah, and I like the idea that you talk about, you making them yourself, they're yours, and you connect with them, so therefore whatever you get from them is a much more stronger link between the two of you. And that's how you do it. You make your own.
Oh, absolutely, yes. One thing is you can't buy Armanen runes. That actual set isn't manufactured. You can only really buy, say, the Elder Futhot, the 24. And if you want the other versions, you do have to, at least you can buy the 24 and adapt them yourself, which is what people tend to do. But if you're making your own, then you can do. I have to quickly add a bit of personal advertising here that the company that will be publishing my book are also going to produce a set of Armanen runes as well. So you will be able to buy those yourself.
I was actually thinking that when you were saying that, I'm thinking, well, that's something you should do, actually. If no one else is doing it, that's a marketing opportunity for you. So.
The guy who makes them in America does a fantastic job, all very personal. A lot of work goes into. Unfortunately, makes them quite expensive, but they are brilliantly done. But you can buy a set.
Yeah,
we'll be producing as part to go to the book.
Okay. Well, anyway, thank you. That's very enlightening. They're now much more to me than some little stones getting thrown around, even though they could be wood as well, little bits of wood. But anyway.
Or the bone's another one you can actually use as well. The bone, again, a once living creature. You can use those too. There's all sorts of things you can actually use, definitely.
That sounds very cool, actually, doing them in bones, because they were once living, so that's good. Anyway, thank you for that, Andy. That's been really enlightening today, and I appreciate you coming and telling us about runes. And I'm going to go off and have a look now and find out more about them. You've really inspired me, so thanks very much.
Good to hear.
See you later. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.